accessed the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Hey, fellow Owens, you're back listening to an episode of the podcast of OA. This is episode number 208, and we've got a lot of great stuff to talk about tonight. This is your co-host, Myron Rumsey. I'm joined by my good friend, Phil Bova. Phil, you and I are recording this on April Fool's Day. Did you have a good April Fool's Day? Did you do any good ones, or did anybody get you good?
I did not. I tried to send a group text to my my wife's family, because we're all in this group text, and I told them that we were pregnant again, but nobody bit. That's probably because I know I'm full of crap anyway, so. That was the only one I did.
I got somebody today on a Zoom call when I told them their shoes were untied, and they actually looked. And I'm like, really? I can't even see your feet. But...
Oh, well. It's a funny holiday.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
It's also the start of Ramadan, too.
Well, we don't have any new Green Lantern books to talk about, but recently I had talked about a couple books I got at Ollie's, which is like an outlet chain store. And one of the books I got was a Batman Elseworlds book that happened to have Batman in Darkest Night in it. And you and I were chit-chatting, and you volunteered and said, hey, why don't we talk about that one? Which I thought was pretty funny. So, hey, we're recording on April Fool's Day. I guess it's fitting, right?
That's right. That's right. Let it be known that this was my idea to talk about a Batman related to Green Lantern book. And it is ironic, and it wasn't planned, but it did happen to fall on April Fool's Day. So it's kind of, it's fitting, it works that way, and when people listen to it, it'll get a big kick out of it, and everybody knows my beef with Batman, and but hey, I'm going to talk about a book that he's in, and I'm looking forward to it because it's not a bad story.
This just shows the great sacrifices that you'll take and make in the benefit of our listeners.
It's for the fandom, and not only that, let's do it in support of the recent movie, The Batman. It's done really, really well. I haven't seen it yet, but I want to, and I am looking forward to seeing it. But I'm still not going to be a fan.
Well, before we start talking about Batman in Darkest Night, there is a little bit of Green Lantern news, not a whole lot. Phil, have you been reading? You and I were reading DC versus Vampires. Have you read the most recent issue?
I haven't, but you can talk about it. It's not going to kill my buzz if we, spoiler it.
Okay. Well, there's this is going to have spoilers in it. So again, if you're spoiler sensitive and haven't read the book and don't want it to ruin your fan experience, totally understand it. But we are going to talk about it a little bit. Throughout the series so far, Hal has been one of the lieutenants of the Vampire King. And the most recent issue, we not only find out who the Vampire King is, but Hal meets his end. He and Wonder Woman go after Batman and the Bat family, and they have yellow paint on things. So it's like, now Tinian knows that yellow is no longer a weakness, but whatever version of the multiverse this is, the weakness of yellow must still be there, I guess. But at one point, Alfred chops off Hal's ring hand from like the elbow up, and he's captured along with Wonder Woman, and Ollie is put to guard him, and Ollie kind of talks to Hal, and Ollie runs him through with an arrow through the heart.
Wow.
And not from with a bow and arrow shot, but a very fitting. He does it by hand, and he goes, I got to find out if my brother is still in there, and he does it to rescue Hal and to release him.
Yeah.
So it's a very poignant scene, which I thought was a very strong part of the book. But Ollie does it, and then when Batman tries to talk to Ollie, Ollie just says to Batman, "Shut up, man! I just had to kill my best friend and put him down." Mm-hmm. And I won't reveal who the Vampire King is because I don't want to spoil it for you, but. It was an interesting end for the character, and this was the halfway point of the series, and boy, there's a lot of stuff that happens in the most recent issue. So if you've been reading the book, I can't wait to hear what you have to say after you read that issue, because there's a lot of stuff that happens in it.
Okay, now I gotta read it.
In other news, DC Comics is once again doing a round robin tournament this year, with the winner getting a book. And it's I find this, just like last year, I find it a little disheartening because there's a lot of good pitches here, and why not? Somebody on I think it was Twitter came up with a really good idea and said, why don't they revive Wednesday Comics and do maybe you don't do the newspaper print thing again or whatever, but do an anthology book and take some of these stories and let them see the light of day. This time around, there's not one Green Lantern book, but there are 2 books that have Green Lantern in the title and one that is very Green Lantern related. One of them being Green Lantern, The Light at the End of Forever, which is in a dark, far future. I mean, DC's really stretching themselves and going for different things, aren't they? But it looks like the Green Lanterns are, again, once long gone, and it looks like it's a John Stewart book. And he basically, he almost doesn't remember who his name is, which is kind of weird. But it deals with him trying to figure out whatever happened to the Green Lantern Corps or trying to reignite it. The other one, this one I find really interesting. I find this one more interesting than the John Stewart one. This is Green Lantern, The Birth of a Conspiracy. And it's 1947. 3 events kindled America's fascination with UFOs, the Men in Black, flying saucer sightings, and the Roswell crash. 3 low-level government employees tasked with monitoring superheroes realized that one person was at all 3 events, the Green Lantern Alan Scott, and he hasn't been seen since. That, to me, is very interesting.
Yeah, that sounds cool. Yeah, and the John Stewart one doesn't sound too bad either, but this one sounds really cool.
This one I'm really into.
I think they need to do more with Alan Scott. I think they need to find a way to intertwine him more with the Green Lantern Corps. I feel like that needs to come to a head because, you and I both know that he's part of the Corps. He's not part of the Green Lantern. He's kind of related. He's kind of this. And, there's that gray area there that I still just think it needs to be hashed out at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. The last book is a Wallace West Kid Flash type book, and it's called Kid Flash, The Speed of Fear. And it kind of merges Reverse Flash with Parallax together.
Cool. That's going to be really vicious.
So that looks interesting. And this character uses a fear-based yellow power ring to create a deadly speed ring, which once again destroys the Green Lantern central battery. But it deals with... but yeah, I tell you, man, it can't get a break. Wallace West chases Thrawn through a bunch of different alien worlds to stop him and the Sinestro Corps while his own powers die because of the Kid Flash's slow disconnection with the Speed Force.
I mean, it sounds like a good story arc. I'm not a big Wally West fan, but I like the story. It's got a cool ring to it.
It's got some potential to it. I think it's an interesting spin. These are all 3 what if type stories. You know what I mean? Like they could do Tales of the Multiverse thing and do these kind of stories in that kind of an anthology book. I'd be down for something like that.
Well, I mean, look what Marvel does with their what if stuff. I mean, all this stuff, all these, like that Wednesday comic book that guy was talking about, you do a what if book, and do all these, otherworldly or other, whatever you want to call them, kind of stories. You never know what you're going to get with a reader. I mean, that's the thing that upsets me the most about these polls. I get it and they serve a purpose, but at the same time, the last one kind of upset me in a way that it's like this one's worse because you have so much potential in this pool of all this talent with these writers and these artists, and unfortunately, you're basing everything down to, well, let's just go ahead and vote and see who's going to win, and you don't know what you're really voting for because you're not getting a taste of it. You're not able to read it. You're just voting for the title, and it's like, well, that's misconceiving to readers to me. If you're going to go into this, you're going to be a DC conglomerate, put some money into this, invest interest, publish all these titles and just release them. Hey, we've got make 3 issues for each title. See what sticks. You never know what you're going to get when you throw stuff out there.
It seems like DC forgets to look at their past. I mean, Showcase was a huge book for DC Comics because Showcase is where they tried out characters and they gave them 3 issues. They looked at the sales numbers, and if the character sold well enough, they'd give them a book. I mean, that's how Barry Allen's Flash came about. That's how Hal Jordan and Green Lantern came about. Is they tested new characters in a book which had just 3 stories for each character, or not 3 stories, but 3 issues for each character. You get a chance to get some sales data and you go from there. I mean, What's so hard about that? I mean, man.
It's not, and everybody loves nostalgia. I mean, if they brought back a showcase book, you got a lot of DC fans out there that are avid readers, and they remember those, like you and I. And I just feel like DC doesn't. They I don't know what they're doing, but I don't feel like they're targeting their fandom in a way that's appealing to what they're trying to publish. I mean, if you're gonna like this tournament thing, it's I'm gonna go vote. Of course, I'm gonna vote. I mean, to be quite honest with you, every single title on that tournament looks really, really interesting, and I would even give it a shot because I wouldn't even know if I'd like it or not.
Right. It's and this also relies on an audience that's going to vote that's in social media. So you've immediately taken some people who don't do social media and you've eliminated them from being able to participate unless they have the DC Infinite app. Because there's 3 ways to vote. There's Instagram, DC's Instagram account, DC's Twitter account, and DC Infinite, the online service. And only if you're in the community section. So unless you're active in social media in some way, you're really not a part of it. And it's almost like DC is saying, well, your vote doesn't matter because you're not in our core demographic that we're asking to vote on these things. I honestly feel like a showcase book is not only prime for not only trying out new characters, but taking characters that maybe haven't had an outlet or a place to shine in a long time and giving them a 3-issue arc of some sort to see, well, this is a property that maybe people have forgotten about. Is there interest in it if we revive it?
Yeah, it's not a difficult decision, man.
Right.
It's really not.
Right.
I mean, and that's the thing about this tournament thing, and it's like you got all this stuff stuck up there, and you get all these writers and these artists, and then next thing you know, they one drops after another, and then after another, and then after another. I mean, I guess DC's goal is to whoever wins gets published. Is that the
Right.
the goal of the whole? I mean, I'm sorry, but I think that's the stupidest thing ever. I mean, it's like let's get a beauty pageant for comic books. I mean, comic books don't work that way, man. I mean, you got to have somebody actually view it and read it to be able to know if they're going to like it or not just by the title. It doesn't work that way. Anyway.
Right.
I could go on for hours. I'm upset about it as it is.
All you really have at this point is a log line. So you don't know creative teams. You don't know any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's not enough to go on. And so it becomes a popularity contest. And what ends up happening is fans who are emotionally invested in certain characters, their books don't see the light of day because they didn't win a popularity contest. And you create an even more divisive fan community. The Jon Stewart book is up against the Black Canary book. I'm like, man, a Black Canary book? I'd like to kind of see that.
Yeah. I would read an issue of every one of those titles. And 10-1 says, I mean, I can guarantee you that some of them are going to stick.
Yeah.
And it may not even be the Green Lantern one to me. I may be it might be like the run now.
Well, and a lot of them sound like they're miniseries more than ongoing books. The Alan Scott book is up against a Captain Carrot and Darkseid book, which
I love that.
To me, it's crazy enough to look interesting to me. But
yeah, I would read the out of that.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah,
it's disappointing, man.
It really is. As far as I used to like the old mail-in votes, and you at least had some, and back then when you were a kid, you had some trust that your vote actually meant something and it was going to somebody that actually took it in consideration. And I think this poll right now I think it's rigged, to be honest with you. I think it's ridiculous.
Yeah. I really think if DC really wanted to do this thing, why not release a book with the first parts of the story in it, and each book has a code? Because I realize this is probably a little more costly, but there was for a while when you bought books, it had a code for a digital version of the book you bought. So why not a code that you use to log into a site and vote for your favorite story out of this issue? And that issue maybe had 3 stories in it or 4 stories in it, and you voted for your top 2. So then at least the people who are voting have had a chance to actually read the content. They're making a little bit of money off the book, DC is. You're only going to get the people that are really invested in the content. You're not going to get people that are just on social media saying, well, I'm voting for, and I would like a Black Canary book, but there's a certain part of the population out there that are going to vote for it just because it's a female lead.
Sure.
But they're not going to buy the book. Let's let the people who are going to vote put their money where their mouth is.
Well, it's misleading,
Yeah.
to me, the whole thing is misleading to people. I mean, and it's a fool's vote if you think about it. I mean, it's a flash one too, nonetheless, because you're just going into it going, oh, I like this character, or oh, I have an agenda because I want to vote for this because I don't want to see that character win. Well, if you haven't read any of it, how the hell you know you're going to like it anyway, even if you're going to vote for it or not, or it doesn't even matter to you. Like you said, I mean, if you put the product out there, you at least give readers some kind of context and some kind of brain to say, well, this is the one I really want to vote for because I really liked how the story was going.
Yeah, yeah.
And then whoever wins, whoever wins. I mean, that's just it's more fair to me that way, but whatever.
Yeah.
DC disappoints all the time.
The last bit of DC news is, if you've been watching Stargirl last season, Jenny Lynn Hayden, Jade, appeared in the show, and they have just cast Todd Rice, a.k.a. Obsidian, is being played by a young actor by the name of Tim Gabriel, who I'm not familiar with.
I'm not. Yeah, I saw the news thing, but I'm not familiar with that dude either.
So it's nice to see them continuing to kind of mind the legacy aspect of the JSA characters.
Well, you can always count on the no, isn't that on the that's not on the CW, is it? It is.
Yeah, it is on the CW now. Yeah.
See, they like to throw those little sprinkles of the Green Lantern stuff, but they can never like go full on and invest in the Green Lantern stuff. You know what I mean?
Right. Apparently, a recent episode of The Flash, there was an extended scene in Coast City, and there was no mention of Green Lantern at all. And I'm like, why are you dangling carrots you're not going to pay off when you said you weren't going to do that kind of stuff unless you were going to make it pay off in the long run?
I would imagine it has a lot to do with some kind of contractual obligation where they're not allowed.
I don't know.
Or they're really stupid.
Right. I mean, we've heard the comments saying, well, they're reserved for the movies. Well, you've already got a Flash in the movies. You've got 2 Flashes. You've got 2 Supermen. So what's the problem there? I mean, come on, really? So it's frustrating as a fan, especially a Green Lantern fan, to realize that Hal Jordan's 2 best friends have had TV shows for multiple years, and he's not made one cameo appearance other than that really quick scene where they were in a bar in Coast City and a guy walks by across the screen. You don't even see his face with a flight jacket that said Jordan on it. That's it. And he was mentioned several times of a missing pilot and all that stuff. It's like, come on, man. Kills me. Just kills me.
I get it. I feel you. I'm right there with you.
But anyway, we've got a great book that I know, Phil, you are chomping at the bit to start talking about.
I'm ready. To put on the bat light.
So let's take a quick pause and we can find out who the Know Your Core segment is for this time around, and then we'll come back. We'll be talking about Batman in Darkest Night.
Listen up, Lanterns. It's time you took the oath with Green Lantern John Stewart. In brightest day, in blackest night, don't let the podcast of Oa escape your sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power. Green Lantern's light.
Fellow Owens, welcome back to another Know Your Core segment. This week, we have the one and only Anya Savenlovich. Anya Savenlovich. That's right, you heard me. This character was created by Chuck Dixon and Scott Eaton. A lieutenant colonel in the Soviet Air Force, Anya Savenlovich was chosen to be part of the top-secret Project Helios. Launched into Earth orbit in 1964, the cosmonaut reported an explosion in the second-stage rockets. It would not be heard from again for the next 35 years. Adrift in space, Savenlovich and her capsule were frozen, keeping her alive for the intervening years. She was eventually recruited by the one and only Kyle Rayner. Her first appearance was in Green Lantern, The New Corps #1, shelf date February 1999. There you have it, folks. Another cool member of the Green Lantern Corps, one you don't hear very often, Anya Savenlovich.
All right, my friends. So let's kind of set the stage a little bit here. This book, Batman in Darkest Night, was released back in 1994. So this is just after Emerald Twilight. This was written by Mike W. Barr, who had his own run in Green Lantern there for a while. This is an Elseworlds. This was back when DC had their Elseworld series. And it takes this little-known character of Batman and matches him up with Green Lantern, which is kind of interesting.
It's from 1994. I was 20. How old were you, Myron?
30.
Look at there. Time flies. Right. In Darkest Night, right?
Yeah.
Batman Darkest Night.
In Darkest Night. So I didn't read this when it came out because this was again, it was after Emerald Twilight. Actually, I think this book probably came out before Emerald Twilight, but I wasn't reading a lot of the Elseworlds and I skipped it for whatever reason. And I only just recently read it when I picked up that Elseworlds Batman Volume 1 trade paperback. I got it for like $5.
Yeah, it was cool. When you sent me a picture of it, I was like, I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, it's got, gosh, it's a huge book. It's got over 500 pages.
That's awesome. How much was it?
I want to say it was $6.99.
That's worth every penny.
Yeah, but it's all Batman stuff, so you know it's not that great.
Well, it's good for fire.
It's
Or the loo.
It says the Kindling edition.
Right.
Not Kindle, Kindling.
The toilet reader version.
But I've always liked Mike W. Barr as a storyteller, and this was a one shot, so it was a limited number of pages. So there's a lot to cram in here. They don't really give you a whole full Batman origin story or any of that kind of stuff, but the scene is kind of like in Bruce Wayne's early Batman days when he's struggling to find, there's that infamous scene where he kind of has this scene where he asks his father, I need a sign to instill fear. Give me a sign. And the bat flies through the window. And in this case, that kind of happens. But before the bat really flies through the window, Abin Sur's spectral ring projection shows up over top of a statue of his father and tells him that he's been chosen.
Yes.
And it's kind of an interesting story, in that it does what a lot of these Elseworlds does is it takes a twist that kind of merges the mythologies together when it's one of these kind of a crossover books. So you see some of the Joker villains with very Green Lantern-ish flares added to them.
Yeah, I like the fact how the ship landed on. It looked like one Wayne's property because they go out there and then they investigate. They get the battery, and it's. So I don't know how I would handle like a spectral Abin Sur coming through like a statue of my long lost father and giving me a ring, telling me what are the powers are, because by the next page he's already got his lantern outfit on and he's already working his magic like it's nothing.
Yeah. I mean,
I got this.
He takes to it like a fish to water, really.
Yeah, he does.
And it's kind of interesting in that the framing context is it's almost like it's Bruce's diary. And it's one thing I did find difficult to read in some places was the narration boxes were done more script-like instead of a regular font. Yeah, it made it a little harder to read maybe, but it also made it like a more personal story. But yeah, Bruce Wayne gets the ring. He goes on to fight crime in Gotham City. But the one big thing is that Bruce doesn't take to being a part of a larger entity. He doesn't take to being in the core like Hal does. He really just wants the ring to do what he wants to do.
Yeah, early on. And then of course Commissioner Gordon and him don't get along very well.
Yeah, which is kind of different because in this case Commissioner Gordon doesn't really like him as the Bat Lantern. One of the interesting things that happens though is that this kind of takes a page out of the Killing Joke book in that you kind of see the beginnings of the origin of the Joker, but that fit very well with the way that the origin of the Joker is told in the Killing Joke. But Bruce Wayne as the Green Lantern prevents the Red Hood from going in the vat. So he prevents the creation of the Joker, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that is kind of interesting. That's a cool spin.
Yeah, that was a neat spin. And then the one thing I do have to say is I have to comment one thing about the art. As I thought it was really weird that they went with the black and green and white traditional Green Lantern outfit, but they decided to make the Batman cowl and cape blue. Instead of using the gray shading like they do for Green Lantern's part of the costume. You know, they use black with gray and use black shading to cover for the black. But instead of doing black for the cape and cowl, it's blue, so it looks a little odd.
Yeah, it kind of does throw it off a little bit. Especially in that scene when he's talking to Sinestro, when he's sitting on his throne. Yeah.
It was really kind of weird looking. But at one point, he does get called to have to go to Korrigar. And he really kind of puts his foot down and says, why am I going here? But the Guardians tell him, we need you to apprehend somebody. And he apprehends Sinestro, which Sinestro is weird because there's no mustache.
But he is Sinestro, though. When you're reading him, I'm like, that guy knows a Sinestro.
Yeah, Mike W. Barr, I liked his run. It was somewhat brief, but I liked the Mike W. Barr run on the book. And he does have a good, he does rate Sinestro well.
And they battle it out, which they don't seem like they battle it out very long. Sinestro seems like he loses pretty quickly.
Well,
Batman tricks him,
He's fighting Batman. He has to lose quickly.
I mean, you're right.
But what's interesting is when Bruce beats Sinestro on Korrigar, there's a portion of the population who are upset because Sinestro kind of, even though he was oppressive, he took care of them.
Mm-hmm.
And
citizens stand up. Please be Savior.
Yeah.
We worship you.
And of course, one person stands up to this whole thing saying, we've got to stand up for ourselves, and it's Kat Matui. And so this is how Kat Matui gets her ring in this universe, is that Hal gives her Sinestro's ring.
And which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Passing on.
Yeah, I thought it was a neat way, again, to tie that into it. I also thought it was interesting, too, during the fight with Sinestro, Bruce Wayne refers to a character named Harvey Harris. And Harvey Harris was a detective character that appeared in one issue of Batman back in 1955. But it was interesting that they called reference to that, which I thought was kind of cool.
That's incredible when writers do that, to pay that kind of homage, just that nonchalant nudge that, the keen eye would pick up, like you. I didn't pick it up, but, that's really cool. That's cool. Like when Grant Morrison did it, Run.
You could sit there and say, well, I got to go look it up. But to me, I'm like, I didn't know the character, but I'm like, okay, that can't be a throwaway name. So it makes me go and look it up because I want to know.
Sure.
I want to know, why did the writer choose this, or is there significance to it? That never bothered me about the Morrison running. It certainly doesn't bother me here. But sure. After we get the sentencing on Oa, much like in the original DC main universe, Sinestro gets sent to court. He's given his yellow ring, and there you go. Batman is then now trying to find the murderer of his parents, which gets Commissioner Gordon to do some investigating. And in one weird piece of, I don't know, I can't figure out how Sinestro knew, but Sinestro shows up in police headquarters in the morgue and kills, he forces Commissioner Gordon to have a ring-induced heart attack and die. But the thing that as I was reading this, I'm like, well, how did Sinestro know to go there of all places? Yeah,
that's what because he just shows up in this filing room.
Yeah. And Bruce basically had gone to Commissioner Gordon, and he was trying to find out about things that took place in Crime Alley at the time of his parents' death, which sets Commissioner Gordon off on, his detective nose starts to twitch, and he decides to look at what happened, and he found that there were 3 murders in Crime Alley, so it kind of narrows down who is the Green Lantern, and Sinestro figures it out.
He does. With some investigative work.
Yeah.
And killed a couple people.
So Sinestro goes to Joe Chill, which is really interesting, and he steals Joe Chill's mind, and somehow, in trying to merge his mind with Joe Chill's, he becomes a version of the Joker. He loses his mind.
He's like a Sinestro Joker mashup.
Yeah, there's one picture in particular where Sinestro starts to laugh, and it's so odd to see Sinestro laugh to begin with, but a Sinestro who doesn't have a mustache laughing at the camera is beyond creepy.
If people want to look it up and read it, you'll have to see it. But I guess the best way I could describe it is it almost looks like a pinkish purple Spock, right? With really, really big teeth, kind of like the teeth that you'd see off the Mask.
Right.
Harry, right?
Yeah. The artist is Jerry Bingham, who I'm not really familiar with, but I imagine that was challenging as an artist to try to picture. And the coloring is such, you're right, the coloring is such that it's like it's light pink in places and almost a purple in other places. So the coloring is off to begin with. So it looks really bizarre.
Yeah. Art is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
We'll leave it at that.
And Bruce Wayne, as the Green Lantern, finds Joe Chill because he does this little detective work. And then you see Sinestro in almost a Joker-like outfit.
It is a Joker outfit.
And I'm like, where? How? Why?
The ring. Maybe the ring did it.
I don't know. The ring is on the right hand instead of the left hand, too, which is odd. But maybe that's the Joe Chill factor coming through. But Joe Chill was not quite that dapper, so I'm not sure what led to that clothing choice.
That's a really, 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 really good observation, man.
And it doesn't prevent
Sinestro, because Sinestro wouldn't dress like that, and Joe Chill didn't look like he was wearing much when they found him.
But like I could see like if he merged with Alfred or something. But
that's so funny.
It's odd and quirky, but it doesn't take away from the enjoyment. But then you sit there going, how did he get from point A to point B on that clothing choice? I mean, that's an interesting fashion choice.
There's some comical things that take place. I mean, but I will say I was interested in reading it, and it ended up being better than I thought it was going to be. It wasn't terrible, you know.
Well, it's great that they gave a character like Batman a chance to do something, you know.
I mean, you know, fair is fair, Batman. You know, you deserve to be in some book once in a while.
Well, what's interesting is you start to see the merger of the Rogues Gallery come together. So you have Catwoman as a Star Sapphire. You have Harvey Dent, who is kind of confined with Evil Star. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see a Star Sapphire with a bullwhip and a purple bustier. You know.
And she looks like she's wearing a huntress mask.
Yeah. It's interesting design choices, but I can dig the whole Catwoman Star Sapphire bit and Two-Face, which it's funny because Harvey Dent isn't Two-Face yet. So
this Two-Face looks like I can't really describe it. It doesn't look like the Two-Face the traditional one.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's an Elseworld story. So, you know, these characters got to be different, you know.
Right. And what ends up happening is that Hal, they want Hal to go to a planet and in the sector 2814. And it's basically the planet Rigor 4, which I could never find any that was just made up. I couldn't find any significance to that one. But Sinestro manipulates the Guardians in true Sinestro form. He creates a problem on Rigor 4, which causes the Guardians to tell Bruce to go there. And Bruce doesn't want to go there, and he refuses. And so the Guardians are trying to figure out, well, what do we do? Do we just take away his ring, or, you know, what do we do? And so the Guardians come up with a completely different solution, and they find 3 other beings on Earth, Clark Kent, Queen Hippolyta, and Barry Allen, and they decide to kind of push them along their superhero path and give them a Green Lantern ring at the same time.
So I'm a little confused about this little part here. Okay, so we got Superman. He's sitting there in front of the TV with his little drink and a sandwich and his farmer clothes, and he's eating. And on the TV it says, "Clark Kent, hear me, and heed me. I represent the Guardians." Right? But then you go to the next one. You got Queen Hippolyta. "I beg your indulgence. I represent the Guardians of the Universe." And then the next, you got Barry Allen falling over, and there's nothing.
Yeah, it's like, and it's almost like the Guardians have caused the chemicals to splash on Barry Allen.
I mean, I guess that's what you can take from it. It would have been nice for like a little panel like the other two had, you know. But
right,
because your casual reader is going to be like, because I'll be honest with you, I almost didn't catch it at first. You know, your casual reader is going to be like, that panel doesn't make sense here.
Right. Yeah, there's no context.
None. Right.
And it's interesting. This is Clark Kent. As you mentioned, he's sitting in front of the TV with a sandwich and probably a glass of milk. He's got mud on his jeans. So this is Clark Kent before he's become Superman, clearly. And this is Queen Hippolyta, presumably before Diana's in the picture. But they basically are given power rings of their own. And they send Kilowog and Tomar-Ray and Aricia and Katma-Tui to Earth to capture Hal and take him back for judgment. And that's their solution, is to just give more rings out.
Meanwhile, Sinestro, Two-Face, and Sapphire get away and go after the one and only Alfred.
That's right.
Or Alfred.
So they fly to the Lantern Cave, and they're about to take the power battery away when the Green Lantern versions of Superman, which is funny to see Superman with a green domino mask and a Green Lantern and a Superman logo combined. The looks are weird, especially Barry, because Barry's got his red Flash outfit on with a green domino mask over top of it.
Yeah, and the emblem's got the yellow background with the bolt, but there's also the Green Lantern emblem on over. And then, like, Wonder Woman's all traditional, and the Green Lantern emblem's between her breasts, and then she's got a green mask on.
And like the Green Lantern aura is around the lasso.
It's a cool mashup. Because I remember I sent that to you, and you're like, "Is that from the book?" I was like, "Yeah, that's cool. It looks neat." I actually shared it on Reddit, I think. I posted it on there.
So they show up, and the battle ensues, and Sinestro gets away with his lackeys. And, of course, Batman defeats all the Green Lanterns, him single-handedly.
He does. Because he's Batman.
Yep. But, in the melee in the Batcave, Alfred dies.
There was a lot of deaths that took place in this.
Yeah. So Bruce has to avenge Alfred's death, so he goes off into space to find Sinestro. And that's revealed that this is what the Guardians wanted. They wanted Bruce to leave the planet and go deal with his more galactic duties, but now he's basically decided to go after Sinestro, and that's it. And he leaves the Bat Cave, the Lantern Cave, to Superman, Wonder Woman, and the Flash to kind of use as their base.
And I'll be honest with you, I would have read two more issues if this would have been like a little continuation.
Yeah, it felt a little rushed. Like they were like, we only have so many pages, so we're gonna skip over some things or accelerate some things, and so it lacked some depth to me. Mm-hmm. But I thought it was weird that the Guardian solution was just to give out more rings. Why didn't they just do that in the first place? They didn't need to lure Bruce away from Earth if they were going to let Wonder Woman, Batman, or Wonder Woman, Superman, and Flash keep the rings anyway.
No, that's true.
So it's one of those interesting stories, and this ties back into Green Lantern universe proper, because this version of Batman shows up in the Morrison run.
That's right, he did.
He's a member of the Guardians of the Multiverse. He's the Bat Lantern of Earth 32. They define this Earth as Earth 32. And I have to admit that Liam Sharp's version of the costume looks much better. Not just in that they got rid of the blue and went back to black, but Liam Sharp takes the ears on the cowl and makes them more pronounced to look like Batman's ears. Mm-hmm. So they kind of take the corners of the domino masks and extend it up like the ears. In the book, they kind of do that, but it's more like points. So it doesn't look so Batman-y. But in the version we see in the Green Lantern book by Morrison and Sharp, it looks much more Batman-y. But it is the same character, which is interesting.
Do you think, at the time this was written to you back in 1994, do you think the Elseworlds would have been established as Earth 32 back then?
Well, back then, this was before Infinite Crisis, so we're back to one Earth. We're back to one of them. So that's why they came up with the whole Elseworlds idea. But I think when Infinite Crisis happens and all of these the new 52 Earths were created, they cherry-picked which ones they wanted, and that was one of the ones they picked for whatever reason.
Gotcha. Okay.
But it's an interesting story. I mean, if I wouldn't have paid full price for it.
No, definitely not.
But it's still an enjoyable read if you can find it digitally fairly cheaply, or you find it like in you're at a comic book convention and you find it inexpensively. It's a fun read.
I mean, it is. I mean, you don't have to be like really even a Batman or a Green Lantern fan to read it. To be quite honest with you, it helps because it gives a little depth. You could like what we talk about and stuff, but at the same time, like both Bruce Wayne's character as Green Lantern, and then the subsequent other supporting cast. I mean, it's really just a decent put together little read. I mean, it's fun. I missed it entirely until you sent it. And I was like, well, hey, what the heck? I'll give it a shot. I'm not opposed to trying things. I don't dabble into Batman very much at all unless something really, really intrigues me. But I will say Thomas Wayne, the version of Batman from Flashpoint interested me when Thomas Wayne had the mantle. I thought he was kind of interesting. I would have liked to have seen that hashed out a little bit because I did read that three-part arc that was attached to Flashpoint, the one when he owned the casinos or whatnot.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. I thought it was interesting to see Martha Wayne become the Joker.
Yeah. So, but this is a fun read. I suggest if you're a Lantern fan, and get out there and read it, check it out. I'm sure you'll find it cheap.
Yeah, it doesn't really require that you know a lot of mythology because, like a lot of these books, it's designed to be reader friendly for people that don't know the lore. They don't need to know the deep dive stuff. Right. They don't even need to know that it's a merger between Catwoman and Star Sapphire. You recognize it enough to be Catwoman that you just, you go with the flow.
Right.
So definitely worth picking up. If you have an Ollie's near you, check it out because it's not that expensive if you can find it. Not every one of their stores has everything together. And I'm not sure if it's a regional chain or like it's an East Coast thing or if it's a United States thing. I'm not that familiar with the chain, but we happen to have a store here in our area. And somebody had mentioned that they had the Green Lantern Corps book. So I was like, I got to go pick that up. And while I was there, I was looking through the other things and saw that and saw the cover of the book has this version of Batman Green Lantern on the cover. So that immediately drew my attention because I immediately was like, I recognize that guy.
And it's cool with the lantern being the bat signal. It's kind of neat.
Yeah, it was neat how they kind of merged them together in a way.
Mm-hmm.
All right, my friends. Well, this was fun. And remember, it was Phil's idea, so he gets full credit for this.
Right. I should get some props from our listeners. So any kind of mad props you want to throw a shout out for me on Twitter or something, I appreciate it. I like to hear it.
We appreciate your sacrifice.
It was fun, and also it was a kind of a little side episode to our normal, retro reviews or talking about the mainstream crap Lantern book that's out there right now.
Right. Well, I'm glad that DC gave this little-known character of Batman an opportunity to merge with the Green Lantern universe so he gets more exposure.
He needed it. I mean,
yeah.
I would imagine at the time they probably didn't have, but what? 62 books published about Batman because now they got about 197 published titles for Batman now.
With that said, my friends, we're going to be back in a few minutes. My power ring is blinking. We've got some listener feedback and we'll be back shortly and go over it.
This is Razor, and you are listening to the blog of Oa. You need to keep listening, otherwise I will track you down with all of my skill, and you will feel my wrath.
Greetings, Green Lanterns, Myron and Phil. We have one message for this episode. It's a voicemail from Jim who has some comments about Green Lantern Jessica Cruz. Transmitting communication in 3, 2, 1.
Hi, this is Jim from Detroit. I would just like to recommend talking about Jessica Cruz as a Yellow Lantern. It makes sense. It gives the character something to do. She wouldn't be lost in the sea of Earth Green Lanterns, which seems to be growing. And gives her a moral challenge. Use the power morally as opposed to use the power. She has to overcome fear. Once you've done that, it's done. But every time she uses the yellow power, she has to be careful that she's walking the right line. And it's a thin line. Good story topic. Keep up the good work. Bye.
Hey, Jim, thanks for the voicemail. Lots to talk about there because I'm a huge Jessica Cruz fan. Number one, I would wholeheartedly like her to see her in the Yellow Lantern, the Sinestro Corps. Well, I'd be the Yellow Lantern Corps. Primarily what I think that would benefit her the most in that is I would like to Well, there's two parts to this. First, I would like to see her be the leader of that corps. I think it would be interesting. Her relationship with characters like Arkillo um, would be really, really, really kind of fun to see play out. The detriment to that is I fear that I don't want to make her a villain. You know, I don't think Jessica Cruz did. I don't think she shouldn't take on that archetype of a DC character because she's done so well as being a Green Lantern. At least in my opinion, I think she's done well. I mean, she was in Odyssey for the longest time, and I mean, she's been around. She's been around the block, and I think she's earned her due. But I'd like to see her as a Yellow Lantern. That's for sure.
I think if DC's not going to give her something to do as a Green Lantern, I think it's a good role for her. I think what I like about it, you remember back when Guy Gardner became a Red Lantern and how he tried to toe the line between he didn't want to be the traditional Red Lantern mustache twirling bad guy kind of thing. He added layers to it. And I think this is the same opportunity that Jessica Cruz would have of how do I function in this group, which is viewed as almost a terrorist group, essentially. How do I operate in that theater? And how do I deal with characters like Arkillo, like you're saying, who are going to look at her differently and look at her as weak? That really poses an interesting challenge for her. And that was, I've often talked about how I think Jessica Cruz, and I still hold this opinion, was a better character as Power Ring than she is as a Green Lantern because the Power Ring challenges her on a continual basis. The problem with her as a Green Lantern is she seems to have gotten over her fear. So now she's just another Green Lantern.
And that's the part that I missed that a lot of writers didn't include in later versions of her, because I see it. Whenever that was missing, I just feel like it did such a detriment to what her character was built upon, right? So when you substitute that for whatever reasons these writers decided not to include in her characterization moving forward, I think you take away the meaning of her. It would be like the same thing as taking away Kyle's artistic impression, right? I mean, it takes away Kyle's whole character type, you just or John Stewart's military background, it's the same kind of thing because a lot of people are built on that identity in that way.
Yeah, I think if you look at Kyle Rayner's another great example. Kyle Rayner's whole foundation was built on being the everyman who's given all this responsibility and has to live up to the legacy of what came before him, even though he's not necessarily connected to that legacy in name only. But that was such an integral part of the character. And once the Green Lantern Corps came back, they almost didn't know what to do with the character because they didn't need a torchbearer anymore. So what do you do with them? And I think Jessica's in the same boat, is that you went, Sam Humphries had her go from being someone who couldn't, I remember there was an issue where she saw a guy in a cowboy hat and freaked out and couldn't use her ring 1 minute, and then she's doing something spectacular the next minute, which gave you some idea of a journey the character was on. And now it almost feels like the only time we hear about the journey is when she's talking about it. Mm-hmm. You don't see her going through the same thing because you've taken her on the hero's journey, and now she's just like every other ring bearer out there. What makes her different anymore? And that's hard. But you put her in the Sinestro Corps, and it now challenges her on a regular, ongoing, daily basis in ways that, if you tried to do it as a Green Lantern, seem really hokey and forced now. Because you couldn't have a book with Jessica Cruz where she's afraid to go shopping for towels at Target, right?
Ones.
Right. It loses, you can't continue that. But here you've got a more organic way of challenging her and her fears as she also tries to figure out how to use fear. So I think it also allows the character to grow in ways, because if she's going to use fear and control it, then she has to know how to control her own fear.
Right. And it helps add layers to her character.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it's a great fit for her. I think it would be good if it was given some place to be seen on an ongoing basis. We saw some little hints of it when we saw it in the Green Lantern Annual. Gave us a little bit of that.
Got the cover right behind me. I ordered the special one with her on it. which is it's a cool book, you know.
I would not call myself much of a Jessica fan, but I think if you look at the character, I think it's what's best for her.
Yeah, it would be cool. It'd be a little confusing if they decided to do that in the books, and then she would be like a Green Lantern on the HBO Max series or something like that, if that thing ever exists or is going to exist or has existed at some point, whatever.
Yeah, who knows at this point. But they're not beholden to the comics anyway, you know, because they're not sticking to the comics with other things. I mean, Guy Gardner's going to be a father and married.
That's true.
So,
I forgot about that. You know, I mean, why not, you know?
Yeah. It's all fair game at this point. But Jim, thank you for the voicemail. Really appreciate it. And thank you for doing a voicemail. It makes my job a little bit easier. I don't have to get the power ring to translate it to English for me. Nudge, 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 wink, wink. If you'd like to be a part of the show, Power Ring, why don't you go ahead and tell people how they can be a part of the show, and we'll come back and we'll wrap this boy up.
You can become a part of the show by leaving a message up to 1 minute long on our voicemail line. Call us at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can also email us at podcast@blogofoa.com. We'd love to hear from you.
What up, dweebs? This is Guy Gardner. You're listening to the podcast of OA.
All right, Myron. That was a fun issue. That was a fun little book to read. You know, just you know, I don't know. I don't like the ongoing right now, so I'm not really appealing to a lot of the Lantern stuff because there's nothing out there. So I'm kind of like wading in the waters, just trying to find where something's at. So when you drop these little nuggets, it's just kind of fun. It's like, well, you know what? I'll stretch my brain a little bit and give it a try. Why not? This was a great.
It's a fun book. It was a good palate cleanser.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know if it's gonna palate cleanse the Thorn Run, but I'm gonna need some sandpaper for that one.
I feel like a kid that's about to have a big dose of castor oil. You know.
One more issue of that run though, so we're good to go.
Yeah, you know, and I don't know if it's going to continue anything beyond that. I mean, some people are saying, well, you know, they're holding it back because they don't want to interfere with the death of the Justice League, and I'm like, well, they're not stopping the other 62 Batman books from being printed either. So who knows what's going on with this whole thing?
You know, it's funny when you talk back to somebody when they make that kind of claim, right? Oh, they don't want to do this. They don't want to do this. And then you shoot back with what you said. You know, you kind of, it's funny what their response would be.
Yeah. Or it's like, you know, you're giving too much credit to DC being smarter than that. You know, it just doesn't make any sense. Now, if there's going to be suddenly some kind of new status quo, but anyway.
I would if DC's got they can't be that stupid. They have to have some plan that's going to happen with Green Lantern. And if you really want to stretch this plan, okay, well, I'll stretch a plan. I'm going to be the optimistic one here before we get off this thing. If you take the Thorn Run's going to be ending soon, thank God. And then you got the Death Justice League. So that's going to ride out this summer, right? However that thing plays out. The solicits will come out. What's the recent solicits? That was up to June? July?
Yeah, it was June.
June. I bet you 10-1 if you start seeing the solicits that'll come up later on after summer. I'm willing to you know what? I'm going to make a theory here, and I'm going to say that they're going to release a book, but it's going to align with the fact that HBO, the series, is going to be amping up. You know what I mean? Because if they have this series that they're making, I don't know if they're making it or not. But they said they were, but I believe it when I start seeing anything about it, period. But at the same time, if that is in fact their plan to make that, they need something to go along with it. And if you can't have a lackluster book going along with one for a hopeful television series that is going to make you some money, you know what I mean? Because people are going to want to go read. Okay, Green Lantern Corps, let's check this out. I'll go read it. if they're going to go to the Thorn Run, and then what are they going to be left with? I mean, some of and a lot depends on the series itself. So how many characters do they have in the series? Well, let's go to the Thorn Run and look at some of maybe they're not in the Thorn Run. I bet you it'll align a little bit more if they do make a Lantern book later on with how the series is going to progress. That's just kind of my thoughts, kind of my feelings on it. I mean, that's the optimistic approach to it.
Yeah.
My pessimistic approach is I'm probably going to take it up to what, like you.
I don't know. I think I'm a little more pragmatic about it in that, Stargirl's entering its 3rd season and there's no Stargirl book in the stands. So does DC even see a reason to have a Green Lantern book to support the TV show? But I don't know. We've got Death of the Justice League and then we've got the Dark Crisis. And what happens after that, who knows? But I can't imagine that Green Lantern is so important to that they can't publish a book in the meantime.
When you have the name of the title Dark Crisis,
mm-hmm.
I mean, you'd think the Green Lantern Corps would have some kind of a bearing in this event.
You would hope. But
yeah.
It's the current state of things. I don't think DC is necessarily that smart. But anyway, my friends, we will be back in a couple of weeks talking about the conclusion of the Thorn Run, and maybe by then we'll know if we're going to have a book for Green Lantern in July, at least.
Well, one can hope.
One can hope. You're right. So, as always, thank you guys for joining us and letting us ramble on about some Green Lantern books and this little-known character named Batman. And we will be back soon. Please, until next time, keep that power ring charged, take good care of yourself and those around you, and make every day your brightest day. The Podcast of Oa is the official podcast of the blog of Oa and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of Oa and the Podcast of Oa on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of Oa and the Podcast of Oa are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.